Well, the Ontario provincial election is over and we have a Liberal majority government, which means the $90 million we spent on this election at least changed something, even if it is only from a Liberal minority to a Liberal majority. However, we do also have our first elected female Prime Minister in Ontario, so that there is at least some milestone that has come out as a result of this. Now, those of you who have watched my previous video know that my intention was to go in on election day, go to the polls and say that I was declining to vote, so that they would take my ballot right declined and then mark it off as declining to vote, which is essentially the same thing as a no confidence. And then if enough people did this, the election would be thrown out, and then there's a whole huge process that it would go through. What is interesting, I went in there and did this, and when I went in and they asked for ID, I gave them my long form birth certificate. And they thought that was actually really interesting, that they had actually never had someone come in with that, or the certificate of live birth. No one's ever given them one of those, and I used that as identification. After that, I said, I want to invoke Section 53, here's the Deputy Returning Officer, here's my thing, I'm declining to vote, here it is. And I made my vote count. I made it say, I have no confidence in this system whatsoever, but you can't write down bourgeois class dictatorship. So this whole thing, me going and voting this time and saying, I'm not going to vote for anybody, I have no faith in this system, reminds me of the very first time that I voted. When I was 19, the first election where I was old enough to vote, I was 19, and I said, I was excited, like this was a huge thing to me. I was a little bit jumping up and down, because I really wanted to do this for the first time, and I wanted to be involved in politics. And I will say, I was very right-wing at the time, and I voted for Mike Harris. So you can kind of blame me for that one. If you remember Mike Harris, you can partially blame me for that. But despite the entirely reactionary element that I voted for, I do remember how excited I was to go down there and vote for the very first time. And I walked in with such excitement and such pride to take part in this electoral system. And then I immediately went home, and then I sat in front of the television, turned it on, and watched the numbers come in for the elections across all of Ontario, and getting excited when the Conservatives got more votes, and getting mad when the Liberals got more votes, and the whole irrational exuberance, to use a term, watching the numbers go up and down and experiencing that emotional roller coaster, to remember all of that and how I started and where I am now, with a revolutionary mindset, with a Marxist understanding of political economy, and seeing the system for what it is, a class dictatorship in favor of the bourgeois. And that acknowledgement that the system is a gigantic fraud. As Marx said, we're allowed every couple of years to vote for which representative of the capitalist class oppresses us and claims to represent us. It was very interesting to watch it go from such exuberance and happiness of being able to vote for the first time, and then coming to the sober realization that the system is a fraud. And I was thinking about that as I was coming back from voting, remembering the past of when I was so enthusiastic and how things are now. The election this time around was tremendously negative. It was a very negative election, and a lot of people were not happy with that. The politicians, this one, they resorted to a lot of mudslinging, constantly emphasizing the negatives of the other candidates rather than promote the positives of themselves, like what's good about them. They focus on what's bad about everybody else. But I'm not tremendously surprised that this would happen. I mean, when you're in a position like Ontario is in, which a lot of Canada is in, where the #1 concern is the lack of jobs, the tremendous lack of jobs, and nobody actually really has a plan to do that, to take care of that problem and actually create jobs. I mean, they have very lofty notions of how that's going to be done, but nobody really has a comprehensive plan of what it is they're going to do. And even when you press them for it, how is that going to work? They don't really have much of an explanation. And I frankly believe that's largely because they know it's not going to work. They're just going Econ 101. This will work. We've been doing that Econ 101 since the global collapse of capitalism took place. And as you can see, 6 years later, we're still in that recessionary phase. There has not been anywhere near anything like peak employment, or even what it was before all this, started. And when you don't have a positive message to send out because you don't really have any plan, you are going to focus on the negatives. And this seemed to be the one thing that all voters had at least some kind of consensus on. Nobody liked it. Nobody wanted this ridiculous, insanely negative campaign. It turns voters off. But I mean, what can you really do when all the candidates are doing it? You still have to vote for somebody, and really hard to alienate somebody from absolutely all the parties. And we end up with situations like this. Now I just want to make a few observations about what was going on this election. The one thing I did notice that I thought was really unfair, at least in terms of the competition for votes, Kathleen Wynne was given, she won. She's now the Premier of Ontario. But she was thrown into an incredibly horrible position. You had everything wrong that McGuinty did. Every scandal, every bit of corruption, everything. And then he's like, well, everybody hates me now, I'm out. Wynne comes in, has to hold the bag for all of this, has to deal with that entire legacy that she may or may not have even actually had a hand in, or at least from the standpoint of someone running for office, they didn't have anything to do with that. That was the last guy who did it. And she had to go around with all that baggage and deal with all of it. And the fact that despite all of that, she still won certainly says something. And I'm pretty sure that something was Tim Hudak's constant going to kill Jobs position. And in another great irony, this election was triggered by the New Democrat Party. The NDP essentially made this happen. They were the deciding group that had this election come up. Their plan was to take all the popular anger towards the Liberals and towards the Conservatives and scoop up more seats. Now, how this actually manifested was the Liberals took up NDP seats. So this, this as a political strategy, this completely backfired on them. They lost seats to the people that they were backing when they were hoping to actually get more themselves. I mean, whoever the chief political strategist for the NDP Ontario, he's got to take a look at himself in the mirror right now. As I said, the number one issue facing Ontario is jobs. Job creation, job creation, job creation. That is the one thing we need more than anything else. Ontario has historically been a manufacturing center. And this, since neoliberalism, has been on the decline, to where now it's basically almost dead. Although they would say, remain positive, there's still some left. And then one by one, they're all closing down. So to just get out of the way, manufacturing is what we need. We need jobs. Everybody had their really vague, superficial idea of how these jobs were supposed to be created, without really particularly saying anything of any real substance. They basically said, yeah, tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts, which, don't create jobs. Theoretically, if you cut taxes on really small businesses that are trying to start, then yeah, I guess it would help start small businesses. But these small businesses are not going to create enough jobs. We need manufacturing. We need physical commodity production that can provide the, over 1 million jobs that we actually really need. And none of these plans are going to do that. They've all got these notions about what we should do and where we should go and cut these taxes, and that's it. There just seems to be just cut taxes. And cutting taxes is essentially one thing: handing more to the capitalist class. So we're in this kind of recession, we're in this kind of position, and we just give more to those who already dug us into this pit that we're in. give more to bail out the people who have power and capitalism that put us all in this situation. We, the unemployed, are the ones who have to pay for what they do because it's their system. It doesn't matter what the government gives them. They could remove a bunch of labor laws. They could remove a bunch of taxes. It's going to come down to the same thing: the cost of production. And the cost of production is one of the biggest elements to profitability. And no matter how much you cut taxes, even if you cut taxes completely, in manufacturing, you will never outcompete China for cost of production. Just because of the sheer cost of labor itself. And ask any capitalist, they'll tell you labor costs are some of the highest costs. And what we do, even for minimum wage, even $10.25 an hour, they will get harder work, more exploitative work, more brutal work out of any Chinese factory worker for not even a tenth of what they pay us. And that is the one huge factor that is not being taken into account by any of the people who were running. Nobody would acknowledge this. The one huge key element. Even a lot of these resources even usually come from the third world that end up in our products. And if a lot of it is already coming from China, shipping it from one end of China to another is cheaper than shipping it all the way to Canada to a Canadian factory. So there's even however much of the, whatever raw materials that they're using, or whatever that is, however much that is, it's still going to be even cheaper. We can't compete. The rate of exploitation in the third world is tremendously higher than it is here. And that's the point. That's why manufacturing goes there to begin with, and it's not here. None of the politicians will acknowledge this fact, because to do that is essentially to admit a function of imperialism and to admit a part of the capitalist system. Part of that contradiction between classes. They're going to have to essentially admit a part of class struggle and admit that they can't do anything. And imagine you're a politician who's running for government and you're saying, well, sure, your number one concern is jobs, but we can't actually do anything about that. How do you think you'd be getting elected on a platform like that? All right, now let's switch to something that might be a little bit more fun to talk about. Tim Hudak's plan to cut 100,000 jobs. If you have high unemployment, hey, why not just cut 100,000 more? Of course, he's referring to public sector jobs. Those should be cut to create more private sector jobs. I don't know how that's supposed to work. Somehow, by virtue of cutting 100,000 public jobs, that'll create, as he said, 1 million private sector jobs. What? I don't really see how that's supposed to work. Now, of course, he has other things he's going to put through, mainly all tax breaks and getting rid of certain regulation. And that's supposed to create 1 million jobs before his first term would be up, had he been elected. I have absolutely no idea how that was supposed to work. This is the bourgeois mindset. Merely get rid of particular barriers and being able to fairly contribute to the country that you're in. And that will create jobs. Like, to them, it's almost like there's no such thing as investment. Like, there's no other factors. Like I said previously, with like the cost of labor, the transportation of, raw materials, all that. It seems like none of these things matter. Like, none of these are a factor into whether or not job creation is taken care of, like is carried out. The only thing is these regulations. Because that's really what they want. They really just want tax cuts. They just really want to get rid of labor regulations to increase the rate of exploitation on us. So how is that supposed to create more jobs? Let alone 1 million jobs. It makes no sense. Now let's even take this 100,000. He said he wanted to trim the bureaucracy. Of course, most of these 100,000 jobs were service jobs. People who do a service for the public. They're not rubber stampers or unelected people who make decisions. So you're not really cutting bureaucracy when you're doing that. You're just cutting regular people's jobs. So this claim that you want to cut bureaucracy is false, unless you just redefine bureaucracy to mean people who serve the public, as opposed to, unelected rubber stampers who make decisions or just pass things along. Because that's what bureaucracy is. It's not people who genuinely do a public service, like stand behind a counter for a government service. So his claim here is just absolutely false. He's just literally just using an excuse to cut taxes. Now, even a lot of those jobs would end up being outsourced, meaning some other company would do it for less money. Those people would get less hours, less pay, less benefits, meaning they would in turn consume less. And a big thing about capitalism is a system of commodity production. And if you can't buy commodities, you kind of got a problem. So they're diminishing people's ability to buy commodities. What's the logic in that? Well, there is a logic in that. What it does is, there's X amount of money going to this part of public service. Privatize it, and a portion of that can now go to a private company. State money can now be taken and given to a capitalist, as opposed to being used to serve the public. And I bet had he gotten elected, I bet a lot of those companies that stuff got privatized too were people who funded to his campaign, or something like that, or had those kinds of particular interests. So that little part nobody seems to be really mentioning. Not even the Liberals and the NDP were even bringing that part up. One thing we should probably really remember with public sector cuts like this is that they literally cost lives. If you live in Ontario, you probably remember a couple of years ago the Walkerton scandal, where E. coli got into the water and 2,300 people were either poisoned or outright killed. The investigation into that found that cuts made by the Conservative government at the time removed the regulators that were supposed to be watching that. The cutbacks of people to watch the safety of water killed. We know this from experience, that when you cut regulators, people are going to die. And this is exactly what happened. And this is something Tim Hudak was risking. And even aside from that, the social programs that are out right now massively help regular working class and even middle class people. And we have all the statistics necessary to prove that. The benefits that these public services bring to people tremendously. It's hard to measure exactly the benefit, but we do know that it absolutely outweighs anything caused by taxation or borrowing money. Now, in 2009, there was a study by Hugh McKenzie and Richard Shillington. Now, in their study, it estimated that the median Canadian family, who has an income of about $41,000, got benefits from public services that were equal to or about 63% of their income. Far more than was paid out in taxes. This means regular people benefited beyond the cost of taxes or borrowing money. Regular, everyday people. And as I said previously, unemployment is a massive problem in Ontario. Right now it stands at about 8%. Now the real unemployment rate, when it takes into account all the stuff that the government leaves out to make it look better than it is, it's actually like 14% unemployment. And that is pretty damn high. Now think about this. A study also showed that last year, for every open job in Ontario, job that was hiring, no matter what it was, there was 18 people able to work full-time. Now that number would actually go up when you count people that are only able to work part-time. But just people who were able to work full-time, there was 18 of them for every open job. Think about that. And some studies have even shown that in the Niagara region, for every job posting that they make at the John Howard Society, For every open job, there's 200 applicants. Think about that. If we even assume an entirely equal chance of anybody getting the job, you've got 0.5% chance of getting that job. And that's implying that everybody's equal, which they're not. Some people have experience in something and other people don't. And obviously, any employer is going to take somebody that has experience over somebody that doesn't have experience. So if you actually don't have experience with that job, your chance of getting that is less than 0.5%. Think about this real reality of employment. It is particularly bad in Niagara, but it's bad all over Ontario. In fact, I believe at this time the highest unemployment rate is in Peterborough, where I think it was auto manufacturing just left. But this is the sobering reality of what it is that we face in Ontario right now. And this is what is not being dealt with. And frankly, I believe within bourgeois democracy, capitalism, it cannot be dealt with. One part about this campaign that shocked me, like I just absolutely could not believe it, was the OPP Officers Association, the Ontario Provincial Police, actually came out with statements and videos against the Conservative Party telling people not to vote for Tim Hudak. For the first time in the 60-year history of the OPPA, Tim Hudak has given us no choice but to engage in a publicity campaign during an election. His positions on arbitration, public sector pensions, and further wage freezes, among other issues, are unacceptable to our members who put their lives on the line for their communities every day. So what does this tell us? This tells us that even the bodyguards of the capitalist class are worried. Is that how bad this recession is? That even those who put their lives on the line to protect private property, to protect the very system itself, they are concerned that they're going to lose out. They're not going to get what they believe is their fair share of imperialist plunder. Think about that. Is capitalism at a point so bad that even its bodyguards are worried about getting cut? How much? I don't know. But the fact remains, police are a public sector job. Now, I would like to apologize ahead of time for what I'm about to do, but you down with OPP, not the PC? To change gears here, I have a friend who was running for Parliament, and in his riding, there was a debate. He is a member of the Communist Party of Canada. He wasn't allowed to go to the debate, but 5 libertarians were. Think about that. They had room for 5 libertarians, but not 1 communist. That kind of little BS to you? I think it is. I think that's definitely discrimination. You literally have 5 of the same thing being able to debate, but not the one that differs from those 5. Obviously, the NDP, the Liberals, Conservatives, what have you, and others were allowed in. Well, why did you have 5 of the same thing and exclude 1 thing that was different? Right? I also did want to mention this time that Elections Canada came out against people who were taking selfies while they were voting. Technically, you're not allowed to photograph your ballot. You're not allowed to photograph voting, like that. And people have been taking photographs of their ballot and then handing them in using their cell phones. It is technically illegal, although nobody's actually being prosecuted for this. What Elections Canada is doing is finding people on Twitter and sending them notifications asking them to take it down. Of course, this is one of those laws where so many people are doing it that it would be impossible to prosecute everybody for it. It just couldn't be done. However, I would like to warn anybody who's like an activist or something who does this, because that while it is illegal and they're not actually going after people for doing it, if you're an activist and they're looking to get you on something, they'll use it. So I'm just saying that even though they're not really going after people, if they want to go after you for something, they will use this. So in general, it's a good idea just to not do it. I don't entirely remember the reason why it's illegal, but the point is it's there, and the law is actually kind of antiquated, given that, you know, everybody has a personal recording device. It's illegal to run a recording device inside an election area, but of course that would involve now patting people down looking for cell phones. Again, that's a whole separate discussion for something else. The point is, be careful, because if they want to get you, they will use this to do it. Now, to wrap all of this up, I just want to remind everybody this was an election, one that probably didn't even need to happen, and maybe $90 million straight down the drain. But we did, however, go from a liberal minority to a liberal majority. So at least in the eyes of the liberals, it worked. And those who really wanted to prevent Tim Hudak from getting any more power, it was still at least positive from their perspective. For the NDP, it was disastrous. They totally dropped the ball on this one. They screwed themselves. But it is, of course, bourgeois politics, and it is still just politics. Whether or not anybody lives up to anything they say is pretty much a crapshoot. Because we know what politics is. Saying one thing and pretty much doing another. So we're just going to have to sit back and wait and see what happens. Thank you for watching. Please comment and rate the video. If you liked it, hit subscribe or check out some of these other great videos. If you wish, share it on social media. While you're at it, why don't you follow me on Twitter? And if you got time, go on over to the MRN bookstore and check out some of the latest books available.